Okay, we've reached a good critical mass of participants, so let's begin this webinar. Again, welcome to everybody. My name is Richard Beardsworth. I'm Professor of International Relations and Head of the School of Politics, and I'm also co-chair of the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention Task Force at the University of Leeds. Sorry, that was a mouthful that I got slightly wrong. And I'm very happy to be chairing this webinar on COP29 and on our delegation that is either going in person to COP29 or is participating online here from Leeds. And I think given the time that we have, it's a short hour, and given the time that we want to cover, I'll go very quickly over a couple of things. Please keep panelists, please answer questions at the end, but please, all attendees remain muted unless you're unable to speak by the host, just basically general rules. Please put questions into the Q&A function so I can see them, as will the other panelists, and we can prioritize the questions that seem to have the most followership on them. This webinar is being recorded, and therefore people will be able, if they haven't been able to come, or if they want to go back to some of the things in it, they'll be able to review it on the site at Leeds. Right, next slide, please. So what is COP29 and why is it important? I imagine everybody who is here knows very well what COP29 is, but I'll just go over a few things before turning to the delegation and allowing them to introduce themselves and then talk about where their engagement and participation in COP29 is going to be. The COPs are annual meetings that take place basically towards now the end of November, beginning of December, and they've been going on since 1995, and they are the international climate change meetings that are trying to reduce our impact, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet and environment as a whole. These negotiations started initially as mitigation, and more are concerned with adaptation and resilience and loss and damage, repair basically, and justice, particularly because many climate realities, as we all know, are not being addressed at the time and scale that is required. So they are important, big meetings, and they are often, again, we will probably all know, structured by both success and failure. It is a gradual incremental process within which we all follow the good and the bad and sometimes the ugly. So COP29 itself, why is it important? Can I have the next slide? We know that global temperatures, they are risen to 1.3 on average. We know that this last year was the hottest year on record, and that indeed in the last months of 2023, sorry, not this year, but 2023, we exceeded 1.5, and this is being repeated this year, which again will be the hottest year recorded since the beginning of recordings. It is clear, therefore, that we are looking towards exceeding 1.5, and it's a question of how we get back to 1.5 as a Paris Agreement aligned target, and the question of when 1.5 is exceeded in long-term expectations, which we're looking at, well, scientists are looking at over a 10 and 20-year period. Next slide, please. Given that, and given the attempt to reduce this average global temperature increase to the minimum increase of 1.5, aligning with the Paris Agreement of 2015, the pledges that are in place are not by any means near enough to be able to reduce it to that temperature increase. And indeed, it looks like the pledges and the way in which the current policies are working with some of those pledges, but not with all, we're looking to between 2.5, 2.6, and some predictions are actually up to as much as 3 degrees. If there is also backtracking, and this COP29 clearly follows the most recent results of the US election, with a president who is a climate denier. If there is backtracking, we're looking between 3 and 4 degrees. So this is a very urgent moment. It's been urgent for a long time, we know, and we keep repeating that urgency. But the stakes of this COP are important because the science is indicating to us, yeah, that we need to address this in such a way that actually global collective action is possible. And there are very strong doubts around that. Can I turn to the next slide, please? So the geopolitical context which we're in and which we need to foreground very strongly at this COP, as in previous COPs, but most importantly now in the decade coming at each COP. You know, we have the Russia-Ukraine war, we have the Middle East war, the US elections, which have allowed for a Trump victory, which will be honored, obviously, and which we wait to see what the exact policies will be with regard to climate, but quite clearly the strong possibility of withdrawal from the Paris Agreement by the US. We have US-China tensions, which will be increasing over the coming years, both with regard to the global economy and with regard to regional tension hotspots like Taiwan. And at the same time, and very importantly, because it is giving the general political context of inertia, we have public debt right across the world, both within the North and the South, and most particularly on the African continent, where the most climate adaptation is required. So it's not a moment that is propitious for international cooperation on climate action and ambition. And it's a moment where clearly political leadership is required, but everyone's going to be looking around for where that political leadership is going to come from. It is important, nevertheless, to get on with what we have to do and continue with as much optimism as possible, at the same time being realistic and pragmatic. So can I turn very quickly to the COP29 agenda? There are 14 initiatives, action points actually at COP29, which range from green zoning through to hydrogen, climate tourism, further work on food and water, and so on. They are interesting initiatives, and please go to the COP29 presidency pages to look at them in detail. But there are two major questions here, which we are probably all of us very aware of, and which we need to participate in. One is the climate ambition, the second point here on this slide, the need to increase our nationally determined contributions so that we can reach mitigation targets around the reduction of global greenhouse gas emissions and align with the Paris Agreement target. The other concern, and those nationally determined contributions, there is a deadline for the new ratcheted up contributions. The deadline is February 2025. So this is the last international climate conference prior to when those submissions need to be in, which will be looking forward right up to 2035, and if they will be reviewed again in a 5-year review by 2030. So there is a lot at stake around where these NDCs are going to be placed and who is going to lead on ratcheting up their own contributions to what is ultimately a global collective action goal. For that to be possible, it is crucial that there is climate finance flowing from north to south. What is also at stake at this COP29 is what is called the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, which is to replace the climate fund of $100 billion that was set in place in 2009 at Copenhagen, and that was finally completed in 2022, 2 years after when it should have been completed. And as a result of that, quite a lot of financial inertia over the last decade between the North and the South. There's obviously a great deal of distrust between developed and developing countries. And that distrust is sabotaging the ability to get collective agreement around mitigation and increasingly adaptation targets. Finance is therefore, yeah, as many have said, it's now the driver and engine of NDCs at a global level. Be it therefore that developed countries must continue to lead on their contributions at a global level overall. This link between finance and NDCs is critical to get more global action across both developed and developing countries with regard to their mitigation and adaptation targets. So that's the stake. It's the link between NDCs and climate finance that needs to be made at COP29. And there's obviously quite a lot of skepticism about whether that link really will be forged or not. And we need to note it very carefully to see how we can build from it after COP29. Next slide, please. So University of Leeds, and I will go quickly because I want to introduce our delegates. The University of Leeds has an official observer status. It makes its expertise available to those who need it, both within climate, atmospheric science, and in a whole range of both science and social scientific, and increasingly also within the arts and humanities, the impact of our research on those who need it within the overall UNFCCC processes and parties and delegations to it. We collaborate with partners to deliver impactful events at and around COP29. And our side event this year, which will be led by Piers Foster and organized by Debbie Rosen, will be international climate research, driving strengthened national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. The importance of which is clear from what I was saying earlier. And that will take place on Thursday, the 21st of November in Baku. We'll also see from this as well establish a legacy from our COP29 activities that feeds into University of Leeds research, innovation, education, and engagement. So it's a two-way process. Not only are we going, be it in person or online, to impact upon the various processes at COP29 where we can, but at the same time, we'll be bringing our research and our engagements and impact back to Leeds to feed into further research here. And that two-way process is very important for us, and which is why we want as wide distribution as possible about our research and engagement activities across the university. And with that, I'm very happy to introduce our delegation. And I'm going to go to the first delegate, that is Matthias. Sorry, Erica, not Matthias, Erica. Erica, could you come in, introduce yourself, and I'll give you 5 minutes.
Hi, Richard. Thank you, everyone. So my name is Erica Moranduzzo, and I am a PhD researcher at the University of Leeds for the School of Law. Why I'm going to COP, basically. So I'm going to COP for a couple of reasons which relate to my multiple roles this year. First of all, because I'm a PhD researcher on climate-induced migration through the lenses of international human rights law. Now, international human rights law is evolving and developing in terms of also the challenges it has to face, especially climate change. So climate change is basically informing the development of international human rights law and vice versa. So now at COP29, there will be specific work on climate-induced migration. Climate-induced migration is not an agenda item, but it has become a specific topic of work anyway. It has been framed under the adaptation and loss and damage framework, and so there is specific work under that specific frameworks. So my point is to look at what happened at that level, especially because I have worked with as an independent expert this year with the advisory group on climate mobility and other ad hoc group of the civil society and the platform on disaster displacement to draft specific key messages for delegates. And we would like to see how far we can go. So we would like to really push the ambition of the delegates in integrating massively the concerns we have about climate-induced migration within the text of COP29. That's the first reason. And the second reason is that I also served as a Women 7 policy advisor this year for the G7 summit, specifically on climate justice or gender climate justice through feminist lens. And I will meet there at COP29 again with other delegates of the Women 7 to push again the ambition of the states, especially because after the G7 summit, the G7 leaders committed to do something about it. So they basically endorsed our recommendation, and they said that they will try to improve and increase the women climate resilience, putting on table specific amount of money. So which brings me back to COP and to the climate finance ambition. So I will go there again to monitor the ambition of the states in reference to climate finance, especially to the new collective quantified goal, which should basically reframe the whole climate finance mechanism in order to make it able to create concrete, real impact changes on the ground. So
great, Erica. Thank you very much indeed. You kept absolutely time, so thank you. We'll see you again later. Matthias.
Now it's me. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be speaking here. So I'm going to COP, and I'm going with the Brazilian delegation. Probably I'll be watching some of the meetings related to loss and damage, and other things related to finance, and also food security and other things. I'm going to be speaking some panels, so I'm just going to put here on the chat. So if you want to watch me, I can see if I can find the links. So the first one, we are going to speak about the role of youth and indigenous people. I'll bring some perspectives of Brazil. The second one, we are going to speak about youth climate conscious. That's one thing that I'm trying to create in my country, and it's working. The third one, that is the SDGs, is related to migration. So last year, around April, we had something similar that's happening in Valencia, in Spain. We had a massive flood because the sea was really warm and evaporating a lot of water, and all this water went to Brazil and made a massive flood. I will also speak about the same thing on the 18th. And on the 21st, I'm not speaking, but I'm organizing. And this will be really nice in the climate mobility. That's the challenge and pathways for climate adaptation in Brazil. So if anyone can watch, it would be really nice. And as Brazilian, I'm expecting a lot of things from this COP, because no many, if you search, not many countries are doing like the NDC's targets. Even Brazil, that changed the government, stopped the deforestation, are not successful in the targets. You know, we are going a way that I don't know, like we just, like in my neighbors in the north, in the US, they just voted in someone that I don't know what he will respond for climate change, and this scares me a lot, you know. But one thing that I really want is that they prepare things for COP30, because I think the best COP is going to be COP30. Last year, I was in the COP28, and the Lula promised us, the youth, the indigenous people, the Black community, that he our voice would be heard in the COP30. And I really hope, this can happen. However, in the COP16, the COP of the biodiversity that happened in Cali, in Colombia, my friend Chishai Suri, she was protesting with other youth organizations from Brazil and America. When I say America, is the continent. They were protesting for one thing called Marco Temporal. That's basically all the governments provide land for the indigenous, because a lot of indigenous people are lose their lands. And because she was protesting about that, she was removed and she lost her badge. So I hope this COP and also the next COP, youth, the Black community, the indigenous people, and the other marginalized, sorry for my pronounce, like groups can be heard, because sometimes we feel that we don't have voice, and when we speak and when we are together and we speak loud, few things like that happen. So that's what I'm looking for at COP, being heard. So hopefully this can be different. So yeah, it's that. Muito obrigado. Thank you.
Matthias, thank you. And again, you'll come back. I think Emma King's question about where do we see signs of hope, I think that will be nice to hear you around where do you see signs of hope, given what you've just said later. Right. Can I now turn to Jyoti? And Jyoti, you have 5 minutes to talk about your participation in COP29.
Hi everyone, I'm Jyoti and I'm a second year PhD student from School of Geography. I'm specifically doing work in the agroforestry systems, including silvo-arable plantations and hedgerows. And in that, I am working on the above ground biomass stock and below ground biomass with roots and soil. And all this, as we all know, the agroforestry is the best nature-based management tool to deal with the carbon sequestration process. And so it also contribute to achieve our net zero targets and nationally determined contributions to tackle with the climate change mitigation. So in this COP, I will mainly focusing on the events arranged in the blue zone regarding with the nature, biodiversity, the indigenous people, and the knowledge of traditional knowledge of indigenous people, and the modern techniques to carry out our agriculture practices to reduce carbon emissions coming from the land, and to restoration of land, how the management techniques with the global corporation of RED plus policies and FAO, and empowering the farmers with various agri-food techniques. So all these events I will be attending in the blue zone in COP29. Apart from this, I'm also keen to know how the global leaders in COP29 it's specifically prioritize our natural systems to maintain their to maintain their structure and functions while dealing with the climate change problems. And I must say we want the funds, the robust funding strategies for developing countries to tackle the problems happening due to the climate change, to empower the workers in developing countries, to empower to innovation, to modern innovations, and with the scalable solutions. So for this, we want the policies with the base on scientific research based. So I think we want that innovations and the prioritizations to deal with the transparent, accountable, and inclusive policies to carry out in a local level, or the people in all levels in the society. So yes, I this is the hope for this COP29, because this COP29 is mainly focusing on the climate finance, and we want the most robust funding policies for everyone in society. Yes, thank you.
Jyoti, thank you very much indeed. And you'll come back later during Q&A. Can I now hand over to Jan?
Thank you, Richard, and hello, everyone. My name is Jan Selby. I'm Professor of International Politics and Climate Change at the University of Leeds. I'm going to be attending as an online observer delegate. I'm really interested in two things at COP29. One of those is methane, the politics of and policy around methane. Many of you will know that methane is a hugely important contributor to global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also had much more of an international profile as an issue, as an international policy issue over the last 2 or 3 years in particular. With a realization that methane is not only a threat, if you like, but also presents certain opportunities, and that if global methane levels do manage to be reduced, that would actually exert a downward pressure on global temperatures. Unfortunately, emissions continue to rise, so the issues around that are hugely important. So I'll be following various meetings relating to methane. The second broad issue that I'm interested in is the incredibly broad one, and it's the one that Richard touched upon in his introduction, which is the question of the relationship between the big non-climate politics of our time, if you like, and climate politics and the negotiations at COP. So the question of how the wars in the Middle East and in Ukraine, the election of Donald Trump, clearly, the rise of far-right and right-wing populist politics, the general decline in the global geopolitical environment and in faith and progress in multilateralism, how those things are feeding into climate politics negotiations. So I'll be following discussions in plenary sessions and be interested in statements relating to that, and we'll be doing follow-up interviews around those same questions. In relation to the issue of what I expect from COP29, well, I think there's lots of different possible answers to that. It's clearly not a moment of great optimism, but nonetheless, I think there are lots of different answers that one may give. Some may be more positive than others. I'm going to give you one particular answer, which isn't my own words. My own words are less interesting than others. I'm going to give you some words from the Foreign Affairs Minister of Papua New Guinea, Justin Tkachenko. My pronunciation is probably incorrect. Apologies. And I'm giving you his words because Papua New Guinea has announced that they won't be attending at COP29, that they're going to be boycotting COP29. And this is what the Foreign Affairs Minister said a couple of weeks ago. The pledges made by major polluters amount to nothing more than empty talk. They impose impossible barriers for us to access the crucial funds we need to protect our people. Despite continuous attempts, we have not received a single toe, a penny in support to date. We need action, not more talk. The last 3 COP meetings have gone round in circles, producing no tangible results for small island states. COP29 will be no different, so PNG will not participate at the political level, recognising the lack of respect for forest nations in the big carbon sink until some progress becomes evident to address the plight of PNG and other small states. Now, I'm not saying that that reflects my view. But that's I think there's lots of different things going on in the COP, but lots of different levels. But that type of statement certainly reflects a perspective and feelings which have grown stronger in recent years. And I think that type of context is clearly going to be a hugely important one to bear in mind in thinking about COP29. I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarity. Again, Jan, you'll clearly be coming back later, especially with the kinds of questions that are being asked. So the last panelist here, and then I'll refer to the other panelists, to the other delegates after Wenwen has spoken. But can I ask Wenwen now to come in, introduce yourself and talk about your engagement and your expectations for COP29. Wenwen? Great, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Yuan Dong, a final year PhD student in food science and nutrition, and I'm working with the nutritional epidemiology group at the University of Leeds. My research focused on the impact of the dietary factors and the healthcare, and particularly in the chronic disease, for example, rheumatoid arthritis. So my academic journey actually gave me a unique perspective on how our diet shifts and how we produce it, and what is the association with our individual health and also the broader public health trends. So this year, I'm honored to being selected with the delegates for the COP29. It's my first time to join COPs. As you may know, COPs is the major, like inviting all of the world the scientists and the leaders and some activators and policy makers to gathering their idea together and to think about the climate change and the climate solutions and how to build up a climate resilient world. So it's really helpful to all of the field in our lives. I think it's very positive conference and really like a priority things we should focus on. So at the COP29, firstly, I will focus on the interlink of the climate change and the public health. You know, the public health, the healthcare system actually account for 4 to 5% of the whole of the global world, the greenhouse gas emissions, and the 62% of the system actually comes from the supply chain. So how we change it? I think there is a promising hope to how to build up a resilient healthcare system. And this link between healthcare and the climate change is often overlooked previously, but this year they have a priority to talk about it. The climate shift actually already expecting health outcomes worldwide, so it's very urgent. And with the most weak population, especially the low and the moderate income countries, and their people is always at the highest risk. And for example, there are some malarias is also spreading into some regions. Previously, they never had this disease before. So my goal is to highlight the need for climate solutions, especially in public health. And secondly, I'm passionate about promoting sustainable dietary shifts. We must need to develop the resilient food systems and also try to adapt to these changes. Shifting to sustainable plant-based the diet can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and also to help our health. I also want to explore how we can link these insights with our research in University of Leeds. For example, in our faculty, we can focus on considering the health impact of climate driving changes in diet. And also, for example, some nutritional deficiencies and malnutrition, things like this. In the end, I hope we can be heard, and also both the government and the policymakers can prioritize the healthcare in a right way. I look forward to working with all of you, and we can think about some positive idea together. And I think our research with the COP's goals, we can contribute to a private world. So thanks for this opportunity to let me share with my journey to you. Thank you.
Moimin, thank you. Thank you very much for that input on your research and its collective nature. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just introduce, thank you, Claire, for the slide. So we are a very diverse group of people going to, I say we, but I'm not going, but it's a very diverse group of people going to COP or participating online. The other delegates, I'll just run through them quickly so you know who they are, and if you wish to contact them to further up any questions or desires for collaboration on your part, please do. Susan and Samuel, who's a PhD researcher in the School of Politics and International Studies. She is observing negotiations. Her work is predominantly concerned with the effect of climate norms on the negotiations. She's also, and I'm going to read from this because I wouldn't be able to remember it by heart, she'll be part of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, the World Commission of Environmental Law, the UCN Commission on Environmental, Economic and Social Policy, and she'll be also involved in activities to one side of those with the Centre for International Sustainable Development and Climate Law and Governance Initiative that will have some inputs into COP29 as well. Susan will be very active at COP29 and we're very glad she's able to go. Piers Forster, many of you will know, is the director of the Priestley Centre. He's also the interim chair of the UK Climate Change Committee, so working very, very carefully and intensely on the relationship between science and governance. He is a panelist for our side event that I referred to at the beginning on the importance of international climate research driving the NAPs, the National Adaptation Plans, and the NDCs, the Nationally Determined Contributions. And Debbie Rosen, who is a research development manager, but also a climate scientist, who will be coordinating that university side event, as well as putting input into it from her own research. Rebecca Saku is a research fellow in climate change and food systems, and she'll be working, she's going to be observing the negotiations and the work on food systems and nutrition security. Then there's V, I won't pronounce his first name because I always get it wrong, V Pramodine, V, who is an undergraduate, a very active and proactive undergraduate. He'll be representing the Conscious Planet Saves Soil youth team, which will be at the Action on Food Hub. He's also a very good, if not more than very good, youth champion. So delighted that he is involved this year. He was at COP28, and it's great that he's involved again in COP29. Katrina Flescher is working, she is observing the negotiations on this crucial issue that really began formulating itself at COP27, then took off at COP28, and we'll see further how it's being operationalized at this COP29, which is the Loss and Damage Fund that has finally been set up. But clearly the whole questions of contributors and recipients needs to be worked out within this general question of flows of finance from north to south within the overall international financial architecture that COP29 will be looking at. And so there are two more. There's Sumeda. Sumeda is partnering with the South Asia Regional Energy Partnership Program, and she'll be supporting a delegation of members of parliaments from South Asian countries. And she's very concerned with energy governance and parliamentary engagement within the COP process. So a very important contribution from Sumeda. And then finally, Rosario Villarreal, who will be following proceedings also on food systems. And let's recall that food is one of the important 14 initiatives of COP29. So that is our delegation as a whole. And I again just want to say, it's very diverse. It's diverse because it's university-wide. It's interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary, and it's also, I think, clearly gender balanced, which is very important, especially from a northern country, to show domestic example. And at the same time, it's working across generations with a strong youth voice, which is very important also for what comes back to the University of Leeds and how we engage not only with staff, but also with students and bring them into the importance of this process. However, to use a word that one of our questioners posed, however despondent we might feel sort of 24 hours after the US election. So that's the delegation, and thank you for all of you speaking so clearly and eloquently about what your participation will be. And what your expectations are. I think some of those expectations might come back in the Q&A. I will now turn to the Q&A. And let me just check. Yep. I have questions here. I think the first question is obviously a major question, which I think we're probably all beginning with at the moment as we think about COP29. And indeed, thinking of what Matthias said about looking forward to COP30, of how we think the very process of these COPs and what they're able to bring about and what they're not able to bring about within the overall, as myself and Jan clearly underlined, the overall geopolitical context. So first question, and please, this is a question to all of you, and I'm going to allow you to come in as you want, but I will, I think, start. Jan, I'll start with you because of the geopolitical context that you underlined. It's easy to become despondent about the state of the world. Where do the panelists see signs of hope? Jan.
Great, thanks ever so much, Richard, and thanks, Emma, for the question. If I have time, three very quick replies. Firstly, the Paris Agreement of 2015 and the COP process as we have it at the moment was designed to be resilient in the face of the election of a climate-denying US president. It was designed in many ways to be US proof. And it showed that it was that to a degree during the period of the first Trump presidency. So, this isn't exactly a sign of hope, but I think we shouldn't imagine that the Paris Agreement or the COP process is going to collapse because of the election of Donald Trump. Second thing to say, and I won't make four because I'll be going on too long, is that the COP process is clearly one hugely important element in what is a global social and political process hopefully towards successful at some point climate mitigation and with that adaptation. And there are other things going on. And when things stall at one level, other things start moving, working more at other levels. And I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I'd be quite hopeful that in the coming years, there will be a resurgence in action by social movements as things at the political level are stalling. And I think that's one of the ways in which we need to look at this current conjuncture. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jan. Erica, can I call on you? I'm going to go around to everybody because I think this is an important question which everybody will have an answer to. So Erica, can I turn from Jan to you?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, yes, I agree with Jan on the existence of the process per se is already a good sign. So at least we have a platform on which we can go and advocate for different, claims and issues and bringing the instances of everyone potentially. And that brings me to my point, which is I'm always really amazingly struck by the fact that there are so many people at COP, that coming from different regions, coming from different communities, etc. And they are there because they still believe in the process. They are still optimistic about the potential outcome of COP. So who am I to not be optimistic as well? So there are people of the South Pacific who are living on sinking islands, and they are there to advocate for more ambitious goals. So this brings me a lot of optimism as well. And finally, yes, the engagement of the civil society and others, so the variety of stakeholders. You don't have just the delegates, so the parties, as it's the states and the delegates of the states. You have the civil society there, advocating the NGOs and the researcher groups with Ringo, etc. All of them bringing their competencies, skills, where they have learned, and the need to be heard as well. So those are good signs, I think. And even if we are progressing just like making little steps, we are still making steps ahead. So we are still progressing, and that's again another good sign. So of course we have to be optimistic, but not naive, because it's a political process, and we have like personalities as Trump, etc., jumping in, etc. But still, we are still progressing in some way, somehow. So those are, I think, good signs to be again optimistic and to still have hope in the process.
Thank you, Erica. Matthias, can I ask you?
Yes, I was gonna say something of that Erica said. Like the reason that I go to COP, the reason that I am studying my master's in climate futures is because I have hope. I have hope and a love for the humanity, and I don't know, wake up sad. I can wake up happy, but every day I have hope. So I think that's what motivates me to be studying climate change. And when you go to COP, you also see people from everywhere in the world, and everyone that's there, they have hope that things can be better soon. So that's what motivates us. And seeing people with this way of thinking makes me happy. So like I know, like the governments, they wanna have sovereignty, they wanna defend the interests of their own country, but the youth that's there, they maybe can take over and maybe be the head of the states of this country, and it can change. So I have hope, and every COP that I go, I have a hope, and I hope again to this COP be amazing, and we be heard, and yeah, it's that.
Thank you, Matthias. Jyoti, would you like to contribute to the question?
Yes, based on the previous panelist, I must say hope is the last thing that ever lost. So this COP is actually not based on only the hopes, but it's also the actions of everyone in the society, or the responsible citizen, based on their sustainable living thing, or the sustainable life cycle, the management of all things. It should be going with the green, or the decarbonizing, or we can say with the sustainable way, so we can contribute something to the to 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 this hope, like by achieving the sustainable goals. So yeah.
Josie, thank you on that point on the sustainable goals. Wait a moment. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, from my perspective, firstly, I think the link between climate change with the food system, the public health, and like whatever our every single field, I think the link is always there. So our research function is to exploring the link. And so the link is never been this clear before. So I think COPs is the opportunity to gather everybody together to think about the link. And then we can have our own plan to think about, oh, so now when we think about like what the government can do, they always think about, for example, the healthcare system resilience. And we can always have our priorities. Maybe the priorities before maybe is something else, but now is the climate resilience. So I think it's more clear for everybody. And also for individuals, I think we can, when we go to Tesco or go to the food market, we actually think about, oh, how and what I eat can help and can change my health and also can keep the public health better. So I think it's a way to being involved. And I think it's a good way to talking this and gathering people's idea together. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a very nice point about the importance of research now that the link is so evident and that we need to build on it as independent researchers within the university sector. I think that's a very important point you've made. Can I, before moving to another question, which is related, but I think is interesting in regard to that, can I just add from where I am? I think one thing that does give me a sense of hope is simply that the economy, it's not necessarily a good thing that it's moving quicker than politics is. And I think Jan was very clear about where politics is at the moment and how slow it is because of the disconnects. And the fact that there is so much disconnecting going on at the moment, as well as connecting, talking again about links, is the fact, the market prices of renewable energies are now below those of fossil fuels, and the economy and markets will turn, and they are turning. Whether they turn at the speed and at the scale that we need within this decade is another matter, and that's where policy and politics is important, and where the election of Trump is a problem. Quite clearly a problem in terms of the acceleration needed. But the energy transition is taking place, and as a couple of delegates are also working on, that energy transition is also being configured normatively in terms of just transition. These are huge things at a global level, even if we're not achieving them. The normative climate, both within the economy and in terms of how we, to go back to Jan's point about how we socially look at that economy. This is very, very interesting, and we need to be researching on it as much as possible, to use Pierre's term of driving ambition within climate. So I do see signs of hope there with regard particularly to the economy and society. Anyway, I'm going to go back to the delegates rather than talking myself. Now, there's a question from an anonymous attendee which is related, and we've got 5 minutes left. And because I've spoken, I'm not going to take up all the time ending this. I'd like to go back to the delegates. An interesting question. How and how much do you want the media to report about COP29? Is now a good time for engaging the public on climate change? Or given the state of the world, would you rather quietly get on with your work for the time being? Who would like to respond to that question?
I can if you want.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just because I had my own personal experience with media. So last COPs, I had to report to the media, to Italian media, what was happening at COP. So I think that right now COP has a very broad coverage. So I mean, it's always broadcasted everywhere. There is even too much attention to COPs, honestly. What I am concerned about is instead what kind of message media are able to bring to the audience, because sometimes climate change is literally superficially described, or because media have their own kind of communication tools, let's say, so they are not able to bring very deep kind of messages, or just what is convenient, let's say. So what I'm concerned about is how media are able, how much are able to deliver the right message on climate change, instead of just, following the threads, or what is like the main topic, without instead deepening their understanding of what's happening at COP, and the main concerns of civil society as well, etc. Some kind of messages are completely neglected because they are not interesting, or they are not convenient for like states or the public. And also we have to consider the control over the media. So who is controlling them, and what kind of messages are they able to deliver in this? That's what concerns me about, like, so I don't have a proper kind of answer, but I am skeptical, but I also see the positive aspects of spreading like important messages to people.
Yeah, thank you. Would anyone else like to come in on that, or sort of dovetail from it? Before someone, I mean, I'll just chip in on that I do think in a media landscape which is structured more and more by social media, and therefore by the fragmentation of any kind of general consensus on any issue. That is what we're living. That is obviously, we're seeing the results of that politically in the US now very clearly. It is very important that that we are working with the media, I think, and that we try and achieve unified voices where possible, given that the technologies are so divisive and fragmented. It's very important to achieve unified voices where we can. So I think it's absolutely crucial, following Erica, I think it's crucial not to be quiet, though I do understand the question is, at a moment of anxiety, we don't want to create further anxiety, and because of the expectation of alignment with 1.5, as we go beyond it, what kind of anxiety is that further going to produce? What kind of despondency is that further going to produce? I think there's a real tension there that we need to negotiate in the coming years. The tension between furthering despondency and at the same time trying to change it into hope, as Matthias very eloquently spoke about earlier. That's my chip in. Jan, do any thoughts there before I close?
Yeah, just one very quick thought. I mean, I think there's pretty clear evidence of a link between extent of media coverage of an issue and support for further action on climate change. So there's recent research, for instance, which shows that actions by groups like Just Stop Oil, for instance, are not necessarily associated. They're often not associated with support for their own activities, but associated with support for more moderate positions on action on climate change. So I think one can take from that in general terms, keeping the issue within public consciousness and public debate is very, very politically and socially important.
Oh, good point. Okay, we're coming to the end. It's 1 o'clock, and I must close it. I found this really, really helpful and a very good introduction to our delegates. I wish them the best of luck, either if they're online or if they're going to COP29. Please, those of you who are in this webinar, do contact the delegates and do let this be a networking opportunity as we increase, and I think the voices here have been very clear of the importance of us establishing links, not only with regard to our research issues and climate, but establishing links among ourselves to be able to be socially active at a moment that is quite tough and where there are some quite important challenges. I look forward very much to the delegates coming back from COP29 and for us having a further webinar where we discuss the outcomes of COP29 and whether people's expectations were met or to what extent, and where they feel the pathway is to COP30 that Matthias and I think all of us are looking forward to. So with that, can I thank you all very much indeed and see you soon. Bye-bye.